Hi, I'm Sam Macadam and welcome to Airchats with Airmacs. The disappearance of MH370 remains one of aviation's biggest mysteries. Our next guest has dedicated over a decade analysing the data and searching for this missing airframe. We welcome Richard Godfrey. Richard Godfrey, welcome to Airchats with Airmacs. Absolute pleasure to have you on this call today. Thank you for joining us and look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So this one's a little bit different. It's our first interview that's not taken place here in the studio. You're in Germany. I'm here in the UK. The other difference is I'm sporting a moustache because I had to shave off my beard for a fancy dress on Saturday, but that's got nothing to do with aviation. So let's move on. Thank you very much for coming on. This is a podcast obviously about you. You're an aeronautical engineer and your involvement in MH370, which is obviously a huge subject for the aviation community and beyond. But I will allow you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and how you got involved in the MH370 search.
Yeah, my story starts back in 2009. I was managing a large project in Brazil at the time and flying between Europe and Brazil backwards and forwards every few weeks. And I was booked on Air France 447 from Rio to Paris with an onward connection to Frankfurt. I had to stay on a couple of weeks longer on business and rebooked on Lufthansa, direct from Sao Paulo to Frankfurt. And when I heard that Air France 447 crashed on the 1st of June 2009 in the middle of the Atlantic, I thought, there, but for the grace of God, go I. And it really hit home. So I followed that tragedy and all of the reports and the investigations and the searches. There were several searches before they found the wreckage. When MH370 happened, I saw the parallel immediately of a modern airliner being lost in the middle of an ocean, this time the Indian Ocean. And I got involved with a group of people who were interested in following MH370, finding out what happened, and sharing online what we were finding out and discovering. So that's where my story begins with MH370.
Right, and for a layman explanation, and I believe you're talking about the Air France incident where the pitot tubes froze.
Yeah.
Which gave an incorrect speed reading on the instruments.
That's right. And it caused chaos because the instruments were telling the autopilot misleading information. The autopilot disengaged. The pilot left in the cockpit while the others were having a break was disoriented and didn't know how to hand fly the aircraft. He obviously had spent most of his life relying on the autopilot to do the work. And unfortunately, these pitot tubes freezing up, there was a heater for the pitot tubes, which was supposed to have been added to the aircraft under a directive. And Air France hadn't got round to doing that on this particular aircraft. Had that had been done, then that tragedy probably would never have happened.
And it was a tragedy. Watching that on-air crash investigation, the most haunting thing I think I heard was that as it hit the water, it was airworthy. That aircraft, obviously a series of events led to the crash, but I think the biggest thing was the pilot was stalling the aircraft, had his hand on the joystick on Airbuses to the left, isn't it? So even though he'd handed over controls, he was still trying to climb, and that was stalling the aircraft. Yeah,
when you're disoriented, you don't know whether you're climb and you need to descend, or you're descending and you need to climb. I mean, you're obviously trying to regain level flight, and when your instruments are telling you different things, then and it's dark, you can't look outside for a point of reference on the horizon. So it becomes very difficult to maintain your orientation.
I agree, and I'm no expert, and it's it's easy to give an informed review when you're not involved in that situation, or when you've seen some of the data. But separately to that, I've often thought about, when I'm on a night flight as a passenger, what's the biggest telltale sign of an altitude change? And for me, it would be the pressure change in your ears. If you're feeling that, you're descending or lower than you should be.
Yeah, indeed, and we get a sort of sinking feeling in our stomach if you suddenly descend too fast. I mean, anyone who's been on a fairground and has experienced extreme ascending or descending movements, and your body is quite sensitive, and if your ears tell you, then you will know that you are in a situation you shouldn't be in an aircraft.
But we're here to talk about MH370, and I think it's been now over 10 years since the incident. And would you just give us a brief summary of MH370 for those that may not be aware or aren't as familiar with the incident of who the aircraft belonged to, where it was operating from and what actually happened?
Yeah, the big difference between Air France 447 and MH370 is that MH370 went missing. We knew where Air France 447 was, and we eventually found the wreckage. We do not know the precise path of MH370, and we have not found the main wreckage. So it remains a mystery. There were 239 people on board. That is the largest loss of life in an aircraft that's gone missing in the entire history of aviation, by a long margin. So it's a compelling story, a tragic story. Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 departed from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, was heading for Beijing in China. But 40 minutes into the flight, the plane was diverted. The transponder was switched off. There was no communication from the plane, no response to radio or satellite communication. But it was picked up on military radar, diverting back across Malaysia. It was almost an air turn back, and looked like there was a problem on board and it was returning to Malaysia. But it didn't return to Kuala Lumpur or any other airport in Malaysia which could have taken a Boeing 777. So no one knows the reason why it was diverted. We then had some Inmarsat satellite data that tracked it into the Indian Ocean. This data was only once every hour or so it doesn't give you a very clear picture of where the aircraft went. We know how much fuel was on board. Boeing did some analysis, so we know how far it could have flown, how long it could have stayed in the air. But those only give you sort of guiding points to work out what happened and where the aircraft went. It doesn't tell you the exact location, which today still remains a mystery.
And what has been your actual role, Richard? Because it wasn't a job application that you went for. The MH370 disappeared. What were you doing at that time? Who were you working for? And then how did you come to being basically one of the few remaining individuals that are actively searching for answers?
Yeah, a group of us got together on a website online, which was run by Duncan Steele, and we exchanged information. There were scientists, engineers, so we knew about the aircraft systems. There were pilots in that group, and we could try to piece together what happened. We got the satellite data eventually from Inmarsat, the raw satellite data, which tells you how far the aircraft is from the satellite and how fast it was moving in relation to the satellite. We had Duncan Steele was a satellite expert, and he could give us the exact location of the satellite and what is known as the ephemeris, so the velocity and position over time. Satellite was always moving. It was basically stationary over the Indian Ocean, but it was always moving slightly. And from that, we were able to calculate some figures on the distance the aircraft was from the satellite and the speed of the aircraft in 3 dimensions. It's a bit of a complicated Excel spreadsheet, but nevertheless, a few of us got together and crunched the numbers. And I got involved, and I remained involved. This group, I think, grew to about 18 people. Some of them have long since lost interest in the subject, but there's still a number of people out there who are continuing their interest in trying to help solve the mystery.
And what is it that you know to date? We're 10 years on from losing a 777, a wide-body commercial aircraft built by Boeing. I think one of the questions I'd like to come to later is how is it even possible to lose a modern commercial airliner? But what do we know? What's been found out, and what are some of the most significant findings?
I think the first, you can draw a circle on the map with the fuel range. We know that amount of fuel on board quite precisely, and how far the aircraft could have flown, how long it could have stayed in the air. 7 hours, 37 minutes was the time. And so that's a big help. The Inmarsat data every hour also gives a possible set of routes, but it's quite an enormous number of possibilities that would fit that. We've also, meanwhile, had 41 items of floating debris that have turned up in various beaches around the Indian Ocean. And oceanographers have worked on drift analysis to try and place where those items could have originated from, on the assumption they all left the aircraft when it crashed. And that traces an origin back, but still quite a wide area, a few degrees of latitude and longitude. So it's not a precise science, because the ocean is quite a turbulent place, and different debris can float in different directions. But it still narrows it down. And what I've done together with several other experts and scientists is used a kind of passive radar system. There's radio amateurs, there are millions of them around the world. They use a system called WHISPER to work out their propagation paths of their radio amateur calls. These are calls that go via so-called skywave propagation, so they bounce off the ionosphere and can literally travel right around the other side of the world. And they have all of this propagation data in a historical database going back to 2008. I went back to the 7th and 8th of March 2014, and there's data available for the whole 7 hour, 37 minutes of flight. So that's really quite comprehensive amount of data. And there are about 300 of these signals every 2 minutes. So it's much better than the Inmarsat data every hour. You get down to every 2 minutes a possibility of a detection of an aircraft. And then you can, from several detections, track an aircraft. So we made a lot of advances in recent years in trying to find MH370.
So based on that data, in your opinion, Richard, what happened to MH370?
It was quite clearly diverted on purpose into the southern Indian Ocean. A bit of a smoking gun that the captain had a home simulator, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and he just used it to fly Boeing 777 and other aircraft, different airports and different challenges, like anybody with Microsoft Flight Simulator would. But he did do one flight into the southern Indian Ocean until fuel exhaustion. And that's not a typical kind of flight. You normally try and, land on an aircraft carrier or land in some very difficult airport in the mountains somewhere. You don't normally fly into the middle of the ocean to fuel exhaustion and to see what happens. So this attracted quite a bit of attention. And the simulator run was deleted, but the FBI helped to recover the data from a hard disk that was detached, an external hard disk that was detached from this flight simulator, but that was found in his house. And I think it raises quite a few questions of why the captain should have simulated such a flight into the southern Indian Ocean to nowhere near any airport, any land, and well out of reach of the rest of civilization, frankly.
And I think you've probably heard it many times, is these things create more questions than they give answers, because I said in your opinion what's happened. Now your opinion's backed by a lot of data, and this is huge. That particular bit of data that shows the flight crew, the captain, had simulated this exact scenario is quite damning, really damning evidence. But why the questions it raises is, why would you do that? That would suggest potentially a suicide mission. If that is the case, why would you go to those lengths? If you're in control of the aircraft, why fly to fuel exhaustion? Why not do something earlier? It's very strange.
Yeah, it is indeed very strange. I think one aspect is it doesn't make sense, because all reports are the captain was a happy guy. He was obviously well respected by his colleagues. He didn't appear to be suffering from depression, or he wasn't in financial problems. So it doesn't add up to a picture of someone wanting to deliberately hijack his own aircraft and deliberately fly it on a murder-suicide mission. So that is one set of questions. Another, as you point out, why fly 7 hours, 37 minutes? If you want to commit suicide, you can do it, in 30 minutes earlier in the flight. You don't have to wait another 7 hours to commit suicide. One thing that's been put forward by some analysts is he wanted to cover his tracks. He didn't want to be found out. He didn't want the aircraft to be found, and he didn't want it all to come out of who, what, why. And for 10 years, he's been successful. We haven't found the aircraft, and we haven't answered the questions of why he would have diverted the aircraft into the southern Indian Ocean.
I think anyone listening will also be going off in their own little direction here. And obviously it's important to mention that from both our positions, we're just speculating. So there's no accusation that this is what actually happened. It's theory, but it's so specific and also peculiar. Where we've just suggested that he's been successful 10 years on, no one knows where this aircraft is, no one knows what's actually happened. That's so calculated, then that also seems rather strange, that someone could be that calculated in their decision making to pull something like this off, and for the rest of us to be in this situation where we're still yet to uncover what happened or recover the aircraft.
Indeed. It is very strange. You're quite right. What we've just discussed is pure speculation. It's not something that would stand up in a court of law. It would not answer the questions in a legal sense. And there are a lot of compensation claims from bereaved families who lost loved ones on board. And it's important because 10 million of us, more than 10 million of us, get on a plane every day. And the airline industry has a great track record for safety and solving reasons why any crash or incident happens. They're fortunately very few relative to the number of aircraft flying every day around the world. And something like this has to be answered. We have to continue until we get the full facts discovered. And it may take quite some time. Finding the wreckage would be very helpful. However, the Indian Ocean is a huge place, and it's not trying to find a pin in a haystack. The pin could be in any one of several thousand haystacks, to use that analogy. And we need to find the wreckage. That will help us learn a lot more about what happened with the aircraft from the flight data recorder, maybe even from the cockpit voice recorder, which the flight data recorder will have all the data of the flight. The cockpit voice recorder will have the last 2 hours of anything that was spoken in the cockpit. So, even someone muttering their final prayers would be picked up on the cockpit voice recorder. And we need to carry on. When we got the wreckage might tell us a few hints as to what happened. And until we solve this mystery, as I say, the largest loss of life from any aircraft missing, the families of those people who were lost won't have closure. They won't be able to let it rest. So there are a lot of good reasons why we should carry on until we solve this mystery.
Indeed. And I can't even imagine what that's like. And our thoughts will always remain with the family members and the relatives and friends of those who are missing. And that's how they are classed still today, is missing, right? Because I did want to speak to you about the legal system and at what point in a situation like this are you declared dead? Do you even reach that stage? What happens in terms of insurance? How do Malaysian Airlines respond to something like this? There are a lot of questions about this.
Yeah, the Malaysian Airlines had an insurance with Allianz, which is a large German insurer. The fact that the aircraft has been lost and written off is established. And so a certain amount of payments have been made already. The passengers on board are assumed to be lost.
Yeah, assumed to be lost. That's a tough one to take. And I know you are in touch with a lot of the family members, and you have some interesting stories actually about certain individuals. But all I could ask really is how. I don't think you ever would be classed as coping, but you learn to cope. How do they feel? A lot of them 10 years after this incident.
They still feel very strongly that we need to find the plane and find out what happened. They feel very strongly that they can't put it to rest until they know what happened to their loved ones. They would like, if possible, remains to be recovered so that some form of burial, some form of closure, some form of religious service, many different countries involved and different cultures and different religions, and everyone needs to be respected. So it's quite a complicated process, but basically the common denominator is hearts are broken, and yes, people are trying to put their lives back together. Some are better at that than others. Some moving forward and have remarried or started families, but others are stuck where they were 10 years ago, and it's like the time hasn't moved forward at all. for them. They're still hoping against hope that something might be revealed that bring their loved one back. And some never give up hope of seeing their loved ones again. So people grieve in very different ways, and all we can do as onlookers is respect someone's right to grieve how they best feel. That should happen.
It's a sad situation, but you mentioned to me on the phone when we had our initial call that you know of relations to the passengers that have remarried but actually ended up coming together, and they're now in relationships. Is that right?
Yeah, there's funny things can happen when you form a community, a small community of those who've lost people, and you travel around the world trying to find out what happened to MH370. It's, to my knowledge, in one case happened that two people who are both grieving and lost loved ones have found each other and comfort with each other in this grief, and relationships in one case started up, and I think that's magnificent, really, that people can move forward and support each other, and of course you have a lot in common when you're both suffering from the same loss or a similar loss and a similar grief, and the big problem with MH370 is the lack of answers. We just don't know exactly what happened. We don't know where the plane is. We can't tell anyone the full story, which will allow closure for them. So it's a very difficult situation, I can imagine, for people to move forward in life. And I don't think anyone will ever forget what happened if they were personally affected by it.
And coming back to the hull loss, and the fact that what would answer a lot of questions is the recovery of the flight data recorder, the black box. Are we up against the clock? How long do we have left to recover that? Because that only has, to my knowledge, a certain life time before it's either damaged, it allows water ingress, or the recordings are deleted or compromised.
Yeah, it's solid state memory. It's non-volatile memory. It doesn't require any battery to keep the memory. So as long as the black boxes are not damaged, and they're designed to take a crash impact, so it's perfectly possible that they are not damaged, then theoretically you can recover the black boxes 10 years later or 15 years later, and they will still divulge their data. That's not always the case. If there is even a slightest bit of damage after years underwater, then the black box can be compromised, and water, as you say, can take its way inside, and then items will rust and not be able to maintain the data. But I'm very hopeful that at least one of the boxes is going to be intact. The flight data recorder would be great if that still is readable. After all these years, perfectly possible that it could be readable. We need to find it and try to see if we can recover the data. There are about 1,000 data items right throughout the whole flight. So that would give us very clear information as to what happened during the flight, which could again give clues as to the motive behind this very clear diversion from the original flight path.
And do you think we will find out, Richard?
Well, I'm very hopeful we will. And the recent proposal from Ocean Infinity, which was submitted to the Malaysian government, is still under review by the Malaysian government, but they have previously committed to wanting to go and search again, and hopefully they will come to an agreement with Ocean Infinity, who plan in November of this year to go back and search. Ocean Infinity has meanwhile developed much better technology for searching. They're not at all put off by the size of the area. They can cover quite a huge area in just a few weeks. And the whisper technology that I've been involved with has been taken up by academics around the world. One particular academic, Professor Simon Maskell at Liverpool University in the UK, has got a team of people analysing over 1,000 Boeing 777 flights against the whisper data, and seeing how whisper data can be used to detect and track aircraft. It's quite a complicated process. It's boils down to using the radio amateurs designed as a communication system, and doing a statistical post-processing of the metadata of that communication system. So the signal levels, the signal frequency, looking for anomalies in the signals. And when you get several signals and their propagation path crossing at a point, and they all have anomalies at that point, then you could well have an aircraft at that point causing those anomalies. So it's quite a complicated task, but they use large-scale computing. I've built a system on my laptop that can do that. It's not as fast as a large-scale computer, but nevertheless, I've automated the entire process of analysing whisper data from start to finish. And as I say, you get data every 2 minutes. So that allows you, and it's very precise, the data in terms of timing, because it's works off GPS satellite time, and it's synchronized to GPS time. So it's very useful data, because you can know how far an aircraft can possibly go in 2 minutes, or in 4 minutes, or 6 minutes, or 8 minutes, and then you can track. And you can see intersections of these anomalies along the path. And you can work out whether that fits an aircraft flight path or not. And that is now nearing completion, this research with Professor Simon Maskell. And he was at the meeting in Malaysia presenting to the Malaysian government. And he's advising Ocean Infinity on where to look. So I am very hopeful that we can narrow down the search area to a very reasonable amount which Ocean Infinity can cover in a reasonable time frame.
So it sounds like on a day-to-day basis, there are still many people doing data analysis. When it comes to the physical search, am I right in understanding that there's no active searches in the area looking at particular, I'm going to say, I want to look at, so I'm thinking about saying lines of latitude, longitude. So trying to refer to a specific area in the ocean where they think there might be wreckage. Are there any physical searches taking place today as we're recording?
No, there are no searches currently, to my knowledge. There are several parties interested. The foremost one is Ocean Infinity, who have searched before without success. They want to search in November, but they require the agreement of the Malaysian authorities because they want compensation if they find the aircraft. There are other parties who also are willing to search on a fixed fee basis. There are other companies who are willing to search at their own expense. It is obviously a huge marketing gag if you can find MH370 in terms of technology to find anything in any ocean of the world, and to be able to make that claim. If you can find MH370, then it puts you at the top of the list of exploration companies. A lot of these companies are looking for natural resources. There's oil and gas and other natural resources on the ocean floor. So that technology is being developed all the time, and there are a number of companies willing to go look for MH370.
So what red tape exists if there's particularly for companies that are willing to do it at their own cost? What's preventing them?
There's no legal problem preventing someone willing to do it at their own cost. If you want compensation, then you need an agreement. However, if you want to then salvage MH370, even just the black box, you need permission of the owner. But I think once somebody finds MH370 and knows the location of the wreckage underwater, it would be almost impossible for the Malaysian authorities to deny salvage agreement to recover items like the black boxes.
If you imagine a day where the wreckage is located, it will be huge, and any aircraft incident generates a lot of media attention. If we think about Ocean Gate and what happened there with the Titanic visit, the same thing. You've got people coming in from all over the world with rescue efforts. I could see it dominating headlines for weeks on end.
And there will be people who want the film rights and exclusivity rights. It'll be huge in the media. At the moment, I get lots of requests to people in the media to help put them in touch with the right people to try and negotiate such rights. And there are a lot of film crews who've asked me for, can we have an exclusive? Can we actually get on board the ship when it goes out and film the moment of discovery? I have no doubt in my mind that that this will be huge in the media.
Indeed. And when you talk about finances, because like a lot of things in life, money's a driver, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons. But even the work you do, this has been a decade of your life and you're heavily involved. How is your operation funded? Other than finding the aircraft, what do you hope to achieve? What have you learned as an aeronautical engineer during this time, which you think you wouldn't have found out otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, for me, on a personal scientific level, it's been a fascinating research opportunity. And to be able to build this passive radar system, 3 years ago, that didn't exist. And it has a huge potential in other realms, not just commercial aircraft. For example, military aircraft or even missiles can be tracked. So there's a huge military potential for this kind of technology. And I think once MH370 is found, then all of the academic research that's going on around the world in Whisper will suddenly become very attractive to military companies wanting to use the academic research that has been developed in recent years. A company in America, Lockheed Martin, brought out a system called Silent Sentry back in 2009. It's effectively also a passive radar system. It doesn't use amateur radio. It used TV broadcasts and FM radio broadcasts to illuminate targets and then pick up this return signals. They demonstrated such a system. It is much cheaper than having a full-scale defense radar system, for example. And NATO published a paper in 2012 specifically putting forward the idea of using amateur radio as a passive radar system. So, these ideas are not new. No one, however, has developed a system which is commercially available and commercially viable. But it would be a natural follow-on from the academic research that's going on at the moment to get involved in other applications. And I have been asked to look for other missing aircraft and also been asked to look for aircraft that military aircraft that don't want to be found. So there are interesting applications, which unfortunately I'm not allowed to talk about.
Of course. Well, I can move on from that if you want. I've got a question, which is probably what a lot of people that use air travel would want to know is, could this still happen today, Richard? Could we potentially lose a commercial airliner the size of a 777 today, or has anything changed since MH370, which would mean it's highly unlikely?
When you think about the fact that there are 39 avionics systems on a Boeing 777, huge redundancy, so flight systems, navigation systems, communication systems. There are 3 sets of VHF radio, 2 sets of HF radio, there's satellite communication. It's almost unthinkable that a plane could be lost without trace, without any communication. Aircraft in the next generation have got even better, and they're very reliable. So if one radio goes down, it doesn't matter, there's another one. And if that goes down, there's still another one, and so on. You would think it is absolutely impossible. And now there's a move to, at some point in the near future, make it mandatory that an aircraft over the ocean communicates its position frequently. So you get frequent position data, and you know, and that system is completely independent of the other systems on board. So even if everything failed on board, which is nigh on impossible, you still have this system communicating via satellite, saying this is the current position of the aircraft. I mean, one of the biggest problems with MH370 is we do not have a last known position close to the time of impact. With Air France 447, we did have that, but even then it took several goes and several years to find the wreckage. So technology is improving all the time. If you get on a plane today, yes, it still could happen. It's much less likely. And it won't take too much longer before we get to the point where this can't happen at all, because the position reporting will be widely implemented on all ocean-going flights. There have been 85 commercial aircraft lost without trace in the history of aviation. And those have been lost mostly at sea, in the middle of some ocean somewhere. Some, one or two in remote areas or in mountainous areas. And so these 85 aircraft have never been found, and the reason for the crash never been resolved. These are commercial passenger or cargo flights. And I think you look at the trend over the history of aviation, it's just becoming less and less likely all the time that something like this happens. Unfortunately, when it does happen, then you have an aircraft with 200 or 300 people on board. It's a huge loss of life in one go. But as I say, we're not there yet, but we're getting very close to the point where you can guarantee when you get on an aircraft that you will get to your destination. And if something does happen, then we know where you are and can come to the rescue.
And these large-scale events, because it was a significant number of people on board, and they attract the conspiracy theorists. And I'm sure you've definitely had your fair share of theories shared with you. How do you feel about them, Richard? And are there any theories that actually you've learned something from, or you've been able to take a sort of bizarre idea that's turned out to be helpful in your search, or are they all just dismissed as rubbish?
There's 150 books written on MH370.
Wow.
And each one has got its own theory. They go from being transported off by aliens to much more sinister plots of remotely taking over an aircraft and its flight management systems. It is theoretically possible to remotely control an aircraft like a Boeing 777. I don't believe that happened in this case, but it is. There are systems that can do that, and we know of these days, a lot of drones are used. These are unmanned aircraft. They're operated by a pilot sitting at a desk somewhere in safety. So it's perfectly possible to fly huge range of flight paths and to do that remotely. I get every week someone telling me they've spotted MH370 on Google Maps, and they come up with, it's in the Cambodian jungle, it's off the coast of Australia, it's near the island of Réunion. There's so many different locations, and they can't possibly all be right. And when I look at them and they don't fit the fuel data that I know from Boeing, and they don't fit the Inmarsat satellite data, and they don't fit the Whisper passive radar data, then you don't spend too much time investigating something which you just believe is far-fetched nonsense. Unfortunately, I've listened to what everyone's had to say, and there are lots of different theories, and lots of different ideas, and lots of different locations, but nothing has come out of any of those propositions and proposals that people have made.
But I think what I take from this is actually you don't dismiss them as rubbish. Okay, maybe aliens. We can both agree on that one. But if someone is saying to you, I've spotted it here, there, you might not spend long on it, but you will look into it.
I do. I look into it, and sometimes there's a rational explanation. There was an aircraft in that location, but it was another one. It wasn't MH370. It couldn't have been at that location because the water depth is only 5 meters, and the stabilizer of a Boeing 777 will stand out of the water by several more meters. So sometimes the investigation can very quickly come to a conclusion of why it couldn't be. But I've had some very serious people with very committed to their ideas, and sometimes retired experts who have spent months or sometimes even years looking at certain data. So they don't take it kindly when you dismiss them out of hand.
And where we briefly touched on water depth, and also just to come back to where you said it's theoretically possible to remotely operate a 777. However, you do have satellite data which places it. Okay, it's still a large search area, but you know roughly where it's going to be, this wreckage. So in that area, do we have a very varied seafloor, seabed depth, or do we know roughly how deep this wreckage might be?
It's probably between 3,000 and 4,000 meters deep. There are some ugly terrain on the seafloor. There are underwater volcanoes, there are canyons, there are cliff faces. So it's not just a nice flat seabed. And a lot could have moved. You could have quite a lot of silt, a couple of meters deep on the seafloor. So you could have covered up quite a bit of wreckage over time.
Is there anything that you'd like to be asked that you think would be really good to lead us into the ending? Or do you feel like the podcast has been running smoothly and we've covered a lot of things?
I think we've covered all the main ground. So I can't think of anything we've missed. apart from the political will to go and search again and to be willing to fund that search for someone like Ocean Infinity. There's been a lot of doubt about the political will in Malaysia to actually go and search again.
Which is, and I guess it's a money thing again. Is who's gonna fund it? When you say political will, this is you've got a budget for that kind of operation, and it's not going to be cheap.
Yeah, it's going to be quite expensive, several $1 million to go and search the ocean floor. The technology and the ships involved are not cheap. The expertise required to analyze all of the data is, expensive people. So, yes, there are one or two philanthropists who are willing to fund, but it is a responsibility of the government who own the aircraft, in this case, the Malaysian government, to lead the search. We have an international civil aviation organization who lay down the rules for what should happen in such a case. And in my view, the Malaysian government should come to an agreement with Ocean Infinity, and they should be allowed to go and search again in November of this year. And they're willing to search until they find. And I'm very hopeful if we just search one more time that we will find MH370.
And I do any, because, strength in numbers, even you do many podcasts. Do any petitions exist? Is there anything that listeners can log on to, can get involved in to help? I know that too many opinions and too much data can create distractions, but actually, are there some things that the average person can do to help support your operation?
I think one or two people have tried these crowdfunding type exercises, but I haven't seen anything come out of that. I think a lot of people say, 10 years have gone by and we haven't found it, and maybe it's we shouldn't be spending any more money. We've already spent, governments have spent about $200 million looking for MH370. Mind you, it cost about $200 million to buy a plane like a Boeing 777. So you could say there's a certain relation. But there is a lot of people with the view that was enough money, and let's not throw good money after bad, and let's let it rest. My view is different. I think we should continue search until the mystery is solved, and we need to know what happened so it doesn't happen again. And until we actually know what happened, we can't take the measures required to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important. Earlier, you mentioned closure when we were talking about the families. If anything, that's probably the most important reason, because it is a tragedy still, and those families deserve to get their closure. I'd be interested to know what Boeing are doing, how they feel about this. It is their aircraft, it's their model. The 777 is one of the safest aircraft models out there. But are they funding any of this? What are Boeing saying, and how do they help?
Boeing helped initially with the investigation, but more recently, I think they've moved on, and Boeing currently has quite a few internal problems of its own, which are demanding their focus. I think the airline industry in general needs to solve this problem because airline passengers in their millions need to have confidence in the airline industry going forward. And until such an incident is resolved, then there will always be open questions. There are a lot of people out there who have a fear of flying, even though it's much safer statistically than driving your car or getting on a train or a bus or any other form of transport. And obviously, we've become very used to being able to get from A to B around the world very fast. You can take a ship across the Atlantic, but it will spend several days on board. And I think the modern traveler wants to get from A to B, especially the business traveler wants to get from A to B as quickly as possible.
Well, I think the comment about air travel being the safest form of transport is important, because one of the reasons it is because every time that there has been an incident, the response is so strong. The investigation leads to innovation, changes, new rules, new procedures. And if you did give up on a search like MH370, it almost sets a precedent that we can reach a stage where we're not going to invest or try to uncover certain situations. It's important that we keep going.
Yeah, one item that's been raised is the workload and stress on pilots these days, with everything becoming more faster and heavier workloads. Then the question is the pilot fit to be able to operate his aircraft? And it raises also the psychological aspect. And I know a pilot has to have an annual medical check, but that's a physical check. It doesn't uncover, for example, in the case of Andreas Lubitz from German Wings, that the pilot was suffering depression, was on medication for the depression, but his doctor, or doctors, plural, did not have the legal compulsion to inform an employer. And it raises all kinds of questions about what happens if someone admits to depression. Would they then end up automatically losing their license to fly, automatically losing their job as a consequence? How do we as a society handle that and allow a pilot to admit that he is perhaps not fit to fly, but cover the financial consequences of that? And we haven't solved that problem at all. A recent poll of 1,000 pilots revealed quite a alarming percentage, said they were suffering from stress and overload at work. And I have a friend who's a pilot, and he just basically says to me, at the moment, Richard, we have the summer season, it's crazy, to talk to me in the autumn. Then I might have, a weekend at home and be able to have a chat. But at the moment, he's flying people on holiday non-stop, backwards and forwards, and we all want more flights to more places at cheaper price, and it puts a huge pressure on the travel industry. So I think there's a lot of questions that we need to ask and find answers for, which remain unanswered at the moment. Was MH370 a case of a medical condition, not necessarily a psychological depression like Andreas Lubitz, but maybe did the pilot suffer some sort of blackout or whiteout, or did he find out something about his health and had an incurable disease and wanted to end his life, unfortunately taking a whole lot of other people with him? We just don't know these things, and we don't have the answers to these questions either in the specific instance of MH370 or generally for aviation, and we need to work that out.
Well, I hope we work it out, and please continue doing what you're doing. I've really enjoyed speaking to you about MH370, the search, the work you do. I know you do many podcasts, and thanks for agreeing to do this one, Richard. And even though it was a tragic circumstance, it's been really enjoyable listening to you and your insights on that specific event.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.